Welcome back to Inside the Philippines Journals, the channel where we sit down with the men who went looking for a second chance out here and came home with a story instead. If you're new, this is where we hand the microphone to someone who lived it, and we let him talk, uninterrupted, warts and all. Before we start, do us a favor. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because we get people from everywhere. And if you've got a story of your own, we read every one. Hit subscribe, drop a like. It genuinely helps an old channel like this keep going. Tonight's fella is named Maka. He's 71 years old, a retired steelworker out of central Queensland, up around Gladstone and Rockhampton, where he spent the better part of 40 years in the mills. Big hands, dry sense of humor, the kind of bloke who'd rather crack a joke about himself than admit anything hurt. When his partner of nearly 20 years walked out the door, he told everyone he was fine. He wasn't. And what he did next, over the following 3 years, cost him a good slice of everything he'd put away. Taught him something he still can't quite explain to his mates at the Bowls Club. And left him with feelings he says he still hasn't sorted out. This isn't a story about a villain. Maka will be the first to tell you that. It's messier than that, and better than that, and worse. So we'll let him tell it his way. Here's his story, in his own words. The thing you've got to understand about me is I'm not a romantic. Never was. 40 years in the steelworks doesn't leave a lot of room for poetry. You clock on, you cop the heat, you clock off, you have a beer. That was my life. Sharon and I were together 19 years, and in all that time I reckon I said the word love to her maybe a dozen times, and every one of them felt like pulling a tooth. Not because I didn't feel it, because I'm a Queenslander of a certain vintage and we just don't, do we? 40 years I gave to that steel. Started as a lad barely old enough to shave, up at Gladstone, ended up a leading hand, and in between I copped burns and blues and a crook back and a hearing that's never come all the way home from the racket of it. It's honest work, and it makes an honest sort of man, but it doesn't make a talker. You don't share your feelings across a ladle of molten metal. So when it came to the soft stuff, the words for what a man actually feels, I never had many, and Sharon used to tell me that was the whole trouble between us. Said I could weld a beam a mile long, but I couldn't say a kind thing to save my life. She wasn't wrong. I've thought since that maybe that's half of why she went, and maybe half of why I fell so hard later. For a woman who filled my phone with kind things every single morning, before I'd even had my eyes open. A starving man doesn't ask too many questions about the meal. So when she left, I didn't see it coming. That's the honest truth. She'd been going to yoga, seeing a lot of a woman named Deb, talking about what she wanted out of the back half of her life. I thought it was a phase. I thought, she'll be right. We've weathered worse. Then one Tuesday, I came home from the Bowls, and there was a note on the bench, and half the wardrobe gone. 19 years, and it fit in a note. She'd met somebody. That was that. I won't carry on like a pork chop about it. Blokes get left every day. But I'll tell you, that house got very big and very quiet. Very fast. It's a proper old Queenslander, high-set, timber, the kind that creaks all night in the heat. And I'd sit up on the veranda of an evening with a forex getting warm in my hand, and the silence would come in off the yard like a tide. I stopped cooking properly. I'd have a meat pie standing up at the bench. I stopped answering the phone. My daughter, Kylie, she's down in Brisbane. She'd ring and I'd let it go and then text her some rubbish about being flat out. I wasn't flat out. I was just sitting there. 71 now, but I was 68 then, and let me tell you, 68 and alone in a big empty house feels a lot older than 71, with somewhere to be. The days had no edges. I'd wake at 4 with the roosters next door and lie there doing sums in my head. Not money sums, sadder ones. How many years I might have left. Who'd find me if I went in the night? I stopped going down the bowls club for a good while, too. Couldn't stand the sympathy on people's faces. Central Queensland's a small world. Everyone knew Sharon had gone. And gone with a woman named Deb, which for blokes of my vintage was a whole extra thing to chew over. And I'd walk in, and the talk would drop half a notch, and somebody'd buy me a beer a touch too quick. I'd rather have been left be. So I left myself be, sat in that house, and let the grass get long enough that Kev next door mentioned it over the fence. Gentle. The way you'd mention a bloke had spinach in his teeth. That was the low point, I reckon, standing there being told my lawn had got away from me, and realizing I couldn't for the life of me remember the last time I'd cared about anything enough to keep it tidy. Now here's where I get to the part 1,000 not proud of. One night, must have been near midnight, I'm scrolling on the phone because I can't sleep. And one of those ads comes up. Filipina women. Meet Filipina women. All that. And I'm not a mug. I knew exactly what those things were. I'd have laughed at any bloke my age who fell for it. But I was 3 cans deep and lonelier than I'd ever admit to a living soul. And I thought, what's the harm in a look? I made a profile on one of them. Filipino Cupid it was called. Put a photo up from a mate's 60th, the one where I've still got a bit of color in me. Wrote 3 lines about myself and felt like the biggest fool in Queensland doing it. Retired steelworker, likes fishing, honest, that sort of thing. I nearly deleted it that same night. Should've, maybe, didn't. And the messages came in. Stone the crows. Did they come in? Now I knew half of it was rubbish. Young girls, 22, absolute stunners, hello, handsome. You'd have to be a proper gala to swallow that. I deleted most of them without reading. I'm daft, but I'm not that daft. But there was one. Rosa. Rosalinda. But everyone called her Rosa. 34 years old, which for a bloke of 68 is still a gap you could drive a ute through. I'm not blind. But she wasn't a 22-year-old in a bikini. She was a woman with a tired sort of face, a nice face, from a place called Valencia, up in the hills behind Dumaguete, down the bottom of Negros. She had a little boy in the photo with her, and her first message wasn't, "Hello, handsome." It was, "Good evening, Poe. I hope this is not rude, but you look like a kind man. My father also worked with metal." That was it. Her father had been a welder, see? Small time, fixing tricycles and gates. And something about that just, I don't know. It got under the guard. We got talking about welding, of all the daft things, about rods and rigs and how your eyes go after enough years of the arc. And an hour went past, and then another. And it was 3 in the morning in Queensland, and I hadn't thought about Sharon once. I want to be careful how I say this next bit, because it matters. I didn't think I was falling for anything. I thought I was having a yarn. I told myself that for a long time, actually. Just having a yarn with a nice lady on the other side of the world. Costs nothing to talk. That's the thing about it, though, isn't it? It always costs nothing at the start. That's how they get you. Except Rosa never got me. That's the part one still can't make anyone understand. Nobody sat there rubbing their hands. It wasn't like that. It was slower and gentler and 100 times more complicated than that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the start of it, back to those first few weeks, when the only thing I was losing was sleep. We talked every day after that first night. Every single day. Good morning texts before she'd even had her coffee. Little photos of the fog coming off the hills, her boy Kenji in his school uniform, that sort of thing. I'd wake up, and there'd be 3 messages waiting, and I'm ashamed to say it was the best part of my day. The absolute best part. 1-500 make my toast, and read them twice. Now the video calls, that's what shifted it from a bit of fun to something with weight. Because I'd read all the warnings, even then. Bloke down at the club, Bluey, he'd lost a packet to some woman he never once saw on camera. So I was watching for that. And Rosa, first week, she just rang me on the messenger. No fuss, no excuses. There she was in a little concrete kitchen with a rooster carrying on somewhere behind her, and her mother, Corazon, poking her head in to have a squiz at the foreigner. Real. All of it obviously, undeniably real. No filters, no nonsense. A woman standing in a hot little kitchen laughing at how bad my Tagalog was. And it wasn't just her. That's a thing I'd say to any bloke thinking these women put on a show for the camera. Maybe some do, but you can't fake a whole household over months. You can't fake a rooster crowing at the wrong time, or the power going out mid-sentence, and her laughing in the dark, or a little kid barging in wanting his tea. Life kept happening behind her while we talked, ordinary and unstaged, and that's what got its hooks in me deeper than any pretty face could have. I wasn't watching a performance. I was watching a family go about its evening, and wishing I was in the room. I learned the family fast, because they were all right there. Corazon the mum, warm as anything, called me Hijo within a fortnight. The dad, Benito, Tatay Ben, they called him, the old welder, quiet bloke, bad chest. A younger brother, Jomar, maybe 19, meant to be studying. A little sister. And Kenji, the boy, 7 at the time, shy as a mouse. Rosa's husband, the boy's father, had gone off to Manila for work years back and never come home. Just vanished on them. She said it flat, no tears, like it was old weather. He left. It is okay. We are fine. And I believed her, because why wouldn't I? Blokes leave. I'd just been left myself. I've thought about that sentence a lot since. He left. It is okay. She never said the other word. Never once said divorced. And I never asked, because in Queensland you don't pry, and because I didn't want to hear anything that might spoil it. That's on me. I could have asked. I had 100 chances. Didn't. For those first couple of months, not 1 peso changed hands. I want that on the record, because people hear these stories and they picture some poor mug wiring money to a stranger from day one. Wasn't like that. If Rosa had asked me for money in that first stretch, I'd have gone cold and probably backed out, and she seemed to know it. Or maybe she just wasn't asking. We talked about my mills and her hills. She'd hold the phone up to the window so I could see the sun come up over the sugar cane. I'd walk the phone round my yard, show her the mango tree, the old dog, the boat I never used anymore. It was Kenji who did me in, if I'm honest. That little bloke got comfortable with me over those weeks, started waving at the camera, then showing me his drawings. Then this one night he held up a picture he'd done. A stick man, big, standing next to a smaller stick boy, and a wonky helicopter over the top, because I'd told him I got to ride in one once out to a rig. He'd drawn me. A granddad he'd never met, on the far side of the planet. And Rosa went quiet and said, "He does not have a father to draw." I had to put the phone down and go stand in the yard for a bit. That's the thing nobody tells you about these setups. It's not the woman that gets the hook in deepest. It's the whole shape of a family. I'd had a family, and it had come apart, and here was one with a maca-shaped hole in it. And God help me, I fit. So I booked a flight. Told myself it was just to see. Just a look, no promises. Cebu Pacific through Manila, down to Dumaguete, 3 weeks in October. I didn't tell Kylie the real reason. Said I was going for the fishing. I'm 71 years old, and I lied to my own daughter like a teenager sneaking out. When she found out later, she said, "Dad, you're a grown man. Why would you hide it?" And I didn't have an answer, except that some part of me already knew what she'd say, and I didn't want to hear it yet. The flight itself near did me in, mind. 20-odd hours all up with the layover in Manila. And me not a good flyer at the best of times. I sat in that terminal in Manila at some godless hour, surrounded by other blokes about my age, big pink foreigners the lot of us, and I had a proper moment of doubt. Looked around at all these old canos heading south with their hopes packed in the overhead locker, and I thought, "Maka, you daft old bugger, you're just one more of them, aren't you? One more lonely old fool chasing something he lost." I nearly turned round, bought a coffee I didn't want, and sat there arguing with myself till they called the Dumaguete flight. Then I got on it anyway. Course I did. When has a warning ever stopped a man who's already made up his mind? The heat hit me first, walking off that plane. Like opening the door on a blast furnace, and I've opened a few. Then Rosa, in the little crowd at the gate, smaller than I'd pictured, in a yellow top, and Kenji half hiding behind her leg. She didn't run at me or put on a show. She just looked up, a bit nervous, and said, "You are really here?" And I said, "Looks like it, love." And that was the beginning of the part that cost me. Not money, not yet. Just the last of my good sense. Those 3 weeks in Dumaguete were the happiest I'd been in a decade, and I'll not pretend otherwise just because of how it ended. That's important, I reckon. If I sit here and tell you it was all a con from the first handshake, I'd be lying, and worse, I'd be robbing myself of the one genuinely good thing in the whole sorry business. They put me up not with them, mind, but in a little place near Rizal Boulevard, the strip along the water where the whole town walks of an evening for the sunset and the Silvanas. Rosa was proper about it. No moving in, no funny business, not with the boy watching, and the family Catholic to the bone. She'd come by in the morning on a tricycle, and we'd do ordinary things. Robinson's for the air-con when the heat got much. A Jollibee run, because Kenji had never once had it, and I couldn't believe that. So I bought the lot, and watched that kid eat Chicken Joy like it was Christmas. Cost me next to nothing. Made me feel like a king. We fell into a little routine those weeks that I'd give a lot to have back, if I'm honest. Mornings she'd come down and we'd have breakfast at a place off the boulevard, this garlic rice and egg and a bit of dried fish, and proper Filipino coffee sweet enough to stand a spoon in, and Kenji'd have a hot chocolate and get it all round his mouth. Afternoons, when the heat came down like a hammer, we'd duck into the Robinsons Mall for the air-con and just walk about, not buying much, watching the town's teenagers doing their courting by the escalators. Evenings, the boulevard, the whole of Dumaguete out strolling by the water, families and students and old couples, everyone eating those Silvanas, the frozen cashew biscuit things, and the tricycles buzzing past, and the church lit up down the end. It's a lovely town. I'll not let what happened take that off it. It's a genuinely lovely town, and for 3 weeks I was a genuinely happy man in it. And both those things are still true, no matter what came after. Then the trip out to Valencia, up the hill to meet the family properly, and that's where I first saw how they actually lived. And look, I'd worked hard my whole life. I'm no soft city bloke, but it took the wind out of me. A concrete block house, half-finished, rebar sticking out the top of the walls like they'd run out of money mid-thought, which of course they had. A roof of rusting iron that Tatay Ben said sang like a drum when the rain came. The dunny out the back. Corazon cooking on a little fire because the gas had run out. And all of them, every one, so bloody pleased to see me, killing a chicken they couldn't spare. The neighbors coming round to gawk at the kano. We ate out the back under a tarp strung between the house and a mango tree. Everyone crowded onto plastic stools, and the food kept coming, even though I could see there wasn't much of it to go round. Rice, and the chicken they'd killed, and a fish someone had run down to the market for special. And Corazon, watching my face the whole time to see, was I enjoying it? Ready to be crushed if I wasn't. I've never in my life been made to feel so welcome and so responsible in the same breath. That's the bit I didn't have a word for yet. Welcome and responsible, tangled up together so you couldn't pull one from the other. The neighbors drifted in through the evening, uncles, cousins, kids, all wanting a look, all shaking my hand with both of theirs, and I sat there in the wet heat, with a warm red horse in my fist, feeling like the most important man in the province, and never once clocking that important, out there, is just another word for paying. That word, kano. Took me a while to cop what it meant. Short for Americano, but they use it for any white fella, and it doesn't just mean foreigner. It means rich. It means walking money. To that whole barangay, a retired steelworker from Gladstone on a pension he considered pretty ordinary might as well have been Carrie Packer. I didn't understand that yet. I thought I was just a bloke visiting his lady's family. I didn't know I'd already been measured up, and not cruelly. That's the thing. Just, that's how it works out there. The foreigner provides. Everybody knows it, but nobody says it. Saving face, they call it. Problems fester because nobody'll say the awkward thing out loud. I'd learn all about that. The first money was Tatay Ben's chest. Second week. He'd been coughing something rotten, and Rosa took me quiet and said the clinic wanted him to see a proper doctor down in Dumaguete, and she was so ashamed asking, wouldn't look at me, kept saying, only if you can, it is okay if not. A few tests, some medicine for his lungs, it came to about 8,000 pesos, $200, near enough, our money. $200. I spend more than that on a round of tires for the ute. And this was the man who'd worked metal his whole life the same as me, just on the wrong side of a line on a map, and now he couldn't breathe and couldn't pay for the reason why. Course I paid it. Any decent bloke would. And the relief on that family, you'd have thought I'd cured him outright. Corazon crying, grabbing my hand, hijo, hijo. Rosa looking at me like I'd hung the moon. And I felt, I'll be straight with you, I felt 10 feet tall. That's the drug, right there. Not the woman even. The feeling of being the bloke who could fix it. After a year of being the bloke who couldn't fix anything, who couldn't even keep his own house together, here I was. And $200 turned me into somebody's hero. I flew home after those 3 weeks a changed man. Kylie noticed straight off, said I sounded like myself again, and I let her think it was just the holiday. But I'd made up my mind on that flight, somewhere over the Coral Sea. I was going to look after them. Not marry into anything mad, not straight off, I told myself. Just help. I had a decent pension, and about 65,000 in the bank from a lifetime of doing without. And here were people to whom a few $100 was the difference between medicine and no medicine. What kind of a man sits on that and does nothing? So we set up the regular money. Rosa didn't ask, actually. I offered. I want that clear. I said I'd send a bit each month for the food and the boys' schooling and Tatay Ben's tablets, and we landed on 15,000 pesos a month. $400 roughly. To me, manageable, comfortable even. To them, a wage, a good one. I set it up on the Gcash, wired the first lot through before I'd even properly landed back into the swing of things, and Rosa sent a video of the whole family waving, and Kenji holding up a new drawing, and I sat in my big, quiet Queenslander house, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't hear the silence. I heard something worth getting up for. $400 a month. What a bargain, I thought. What a bargain for a reason to live. I didn't do the other sum, the one where $400 a month is only ever the floor, never the ceiling. That sum came later, and it came fast. The $400 a month held for about, 2 months before the shape of it started to change. And I want to walk you through how, because it never once felt like being fleeced. That's what people don't get. There was no single moment where a reasonable man would have stood up and said, "Righto, this is a rort, I'm off." It came a slice at a time, and every slice had a face and a reason, and every reason was true. First it was Jomar, the younger brother. 19, sharp kid, better with his head than his hands, and he'd had to drop his studies when the money ran out, and now he was just kicking round the barangay, riding a borrowed habal-habal, the motorbike taxis, going nowhere. Rosa didn't dress it up. She said, straight, "If he does not study, he will end up like the others, drinking tandwe, making babies, nothing." And she was dead right. I'd seen those blokes on the corner. So I put Jomar back into his course, some technical thing down in Dumaguete, and that ran about 40,000 pesos a semester. $1,000, call it, our money, 3 times over the couple of years. 1,200 pesos here, 1,200 there. Before you know it, you've paid 3 semesters. There was a rhythm to how the asks came, and it took me a long time to see it, because each one arrived on its own, wearing its own good reason. Rosa never once demanded. That's what threw me. It was always sideways, always ashamed, always only if you can. She'd go quiet on a call for a day or two first, and I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd say nothing, nothing, and I'd push, and eventually out it would come. Some trouble, some bill, some cousin in strife, and by the time she told me I was so relieved she wasn't going off me, that paying felt like the good news. That's a neat little trick, that, whether she meant it as one or not. Make the man drag the problem out of you, and by the time he's got it, he's grateful for the chance to fix it. I don't think she sat and planned that. I think it's just how shame works out there, and shame and strategy can look exactly the same from the outside. But I didn't begrudge it. Honestly, didn't. The kid would send me his marks, call me Kuya, older brother, and I felt like I was building something. That's the word I kept using in my own head. Building. I was building this family up out of the hole they were in, and every peso was a brick. Then there was the sari-sari store. You'll see them everywhere out there. Little front window shops selling single cigarettes and sachets of shampoo and warm Coke. Run out of the front of the house. Corazon had always wanted one, a way to bring in a bit herself, so they weren't leaning on me for every last thing, and I actually thought that was sound. Independence? Hey. So I put up the capital to stock it, and put a proper counter in, and a second-hand fridge for the cold drinks. 70,000 pesos, near enough $2,000. And for a while it worked. She'd send me photos of it, proud as punch, the shelves full, the neighbors coming by. I told myself these weren't handouts. These were investments. The store, the boys' education, that was me setting them up to stand on their own feet so that one day they wouldn't need the monthly money at all. That was the story I told myself. It's a good story. I nearly believe it still. The trouble is, the monthly money never once went down. The store didn't replace it. Jomar's schooling didn't replace it. They just sat alongside it. Everything I built became another thing to maintain. Not a thing that paid its own way. But you don't see that when you're in it. You see a family getting on its feet, and your hand in it, and it feels like the best money you ever spent. There were the balikbayan boxes, too, which I'll mention because they're a small thing that tells you the whole story. That's what they call the great cardboard boxes the foreigners and the overseas workers ship home stuffed with goods. I sent a couple. Chocolate and tinned corned beef and shampoo and shoes for Kenji and a good pair of work boots for Jomar. And Rosa would send back video of them opening it like it was Christmas morning, the whole barangay round to see what the Kano had sent. Cost me a few $100s each time with the freight, nothing really. But I noticed, second box, there was a list. A friendly list, mind, if it is not too much, but a list all the same, from people I'd never met. The neighbor wanted vitamins. A cousin wanted a particular phone. I was becoming, without ever agreeing to it, a sort of standing account the whole street could draw on. And every withdrawal came wrapped in love and gratitude, so you couldn't have said no without feeling like a mongrel. That's the genius of it, if genius is the word, and I'm not sure it is. Nobody twists your arm. They just make saying no cost more than saying yes. I went back a second time the following year, another 3 weeks, and that's when it stopped being a holiday romance and started being, well, a life. Rosa and I were properly together by then. We'd talk about the future, careful-like, both of us a bit scared of it. She'd say, "When we are married," and I'd not correct her, and she'd not push it. Kenji called me Papa Maka now. No shyness left in him, glued to my side the whole 3 weeks. And I tell you, that near broke me every time. I'd never had a son. Kylie was my whole heart, but I'd never had a little bloke to teach to fish. And here was one, and he thought the sun shone out of me. Now, while I was out there that second trip, Tate Ben went down properly. His heart this time, not just the chest. Middle of the night, the whole house up, and we got him down the hill to the hospital in Dumaguete in a neighbor's van because the ambulance was a joke. And out there, I learned the hard way. The hospital won't lift a finger till someone shows they can pay. No deposit, no treatment. Doesn't matter if the man's dying in the corridor. So there I am at the counter at 2 in the morning, and it's my card or nothing. The bill, by the time he was stable and out, came to about 130,000 pesos, $3,500, our money, in one hit. Now 3.5 grand won't break a man who's got 60-odd in the bank. But it was the first time I felt the ground shift under me, because it wasn't budgeted, wasn't a nice manageable 400 a month. It was a wall of money, all at once, and no choice in it. None. Because the alternative was letting Rosa's father die, while I stood there with the means to stop it in my pocket. What was I going to do? Say no? Do the sums first? You can't. Nobody could. And I think, somewhere in me, I understood right then that I'd handed over the choice entirely. That from here on, whenever something went wrong for that family, it went wrong for my bank account, and there'd never be a good moment to say enough. I remember standing at that counter, the fluorescent light buzzing, a woman in the next chair holding a baby that wasn't right somehow and no money to be seen about it, and the clerk looking at me with a face that said, "Well, you're the foreigner. You'll sort it." And me realizing there was no version of this where I walked away. I could have been a saint or a scoundrel, made no difference. The card was in my pocket, and the man was dying, and that was the sum of it. I signed for the deposit, and then I went and stood in the car park in the 2 a.m. heat, and rang no one, and told no one. And I felt something I've never quite had words for. Not resentment. Closer to vertigo. The feeling of a floor you thought was solid, turning out to be a bridge, and you already halfway across it, and no rail. There's no good moment to say enough when it's a dying man or a kid's future. There just isn't. And they knew that. Not cruelly. They just knew it. The way you know which way water runs. The typhoon was the one that should have woken me up. And instead, it just pulled me in deeper. This was late in the second year. One of the big ones came through the Visayas that December, flattened half of Negros, and their roof, that singing iron roof Tatay Ben was so fond of, it just peeled off into the dark and was gone. The half-finished walls held, but the family was living under tarps and banana leaf, the lot of them, Kenji included, in the rain. Rosa didn't even have to ask that time. I saw the photos, and I was on the Gcash before she'd finished sending them. New roof, proper trusses this go. And while the builders were up there anyway, they finished off the top of the walls that had stood there half done, with the rebar poking out for a decade. 150,000 pesos, all up, $4,000. And I didn't even flinch. That's what frightens me looking back. $4,000 and I didn't blink. Because by then, the money had stopped feeling like money. It had turned into something else. A way of loving them, and you don't count that, do you? You don't stand there going, well, I loved you, $300 worth today. I sat down one night around then, after the roof, with a beer and the bank app, and I actually added it up for the first time. Everything since I'd started. The monthly money, 20 months of it, the hospital, the schooling, the store, the roof, the flights. It came to somewhere the wrong side of $20,000 already, and climbing, and I remember sitting there in the dark on the veranda, with the phone glowing in my hand, and this cold feeling going through me. Not about the money exactly, about the fact that I hadn't noticed. 40 years I'd counted every dollar, done without, saved hard. And I'd let 20,000 walk out the door a slice at a time without keeping the tally. That's not like me. That was never like me. And here's the mad part. One didn't stop. I looked at that number, felt the cold go through me, and then I looked at a photo of Kenji under the new roof, grinning up at the camera. And I put the phone down, and I thought, so what? So bloody what? It's only money. I've got no one here. They're the only thing that wants me. And I went to bed. I've turned that night over more than any other, because that was the one where a sensible man gets off the ride. That was the exit. Right there. The tally in the dark. The cold feeling. 20,000 gone. And the pattern plain as day in front of me. Any of you watching, you'll have your own version of that night coming, or you've had it. The night the numbers finally line up and tell you the truth. And I want you to know what I did with mine, because it might save you yours. I looked at the truth, and I felt it land. And then I chose the photo of the boy over the truth. And I went to sleep, telling myself it was love. It wasn't only love. It was a lonely man who'd rather go broke than go back to that silence. I dressed it up as generosity because generosity's a nicer thing to be than desperate. But underneath, it was the same hole Sharon left, and I was shoveling my life savings into it, a payment at a time, and calling the shoveling devotion. That's when I decided to build the house. See, they'd been talking about it a while, gentle, never pushing. The dream of a real house, finished, block, with a proper roof and a real kitchen for Corazon, and rooms so the kids weren't all top to tail. And Rosa and I, by now, we were planning to marry. I'd be moving out there, or half the year at least. And it made a kind of sense in my head. A home for all of us, for my old age, somewhere Kenji could grow up. So I said I'd fund the build, on the family's land, up in Valencia. Their land. Because here's a thing I did actually know. I wasn't a complete mug. A foreigner can't own land in the Philippines. Not a square inch. Everyone tells you that. So the land was theirs and always would be, and the house I paid for would sit on it, in their name. And I told myself that was fine, because we were family, and family doesn't cheat family. That was the theory. I didn't hand it over all at once, at least I had that much sense left. I sent it in stages as the build went. Foundation and posts, one lot. Blocks and the pour, another. Roof and windows, another. Over about 8 or 9 months, it came to 800,000 pesos, $21,500, our money, on top of everything else. That was the bulk of what I had left after a lifetime of the mills, going into a house on land I could never own, in a country I'd visited twice, for a marriage that hadn't happened yet. Kylie found out about the house before I meant her to. She'd flown up to Gladstone for my birthday, and she saw the plans on the kitchen table, the little drawing the builder had done, and she went very quiet in that way. That's worse than shouting. She's an accountant, my girl, does the books for a couple of trucking mobs down in Brisbane, and she sat there with the plan and my bank statements she'd asked to see, and she added it up in about 90 seconds flat, with her lips moving, and then she looked up at me, and her eyes were wet, and she said, "Dad, this is Mum's inheritance. This is my kid's inheritance. You're giving it to strangers on the other side of the world for a house you can't own." And I said something about how they weren't strangers, they were family. And she said, "They're your family. Are you theirs?" And I didn't have an answer to that. I've still not got a good one. We had a blue, first real blue we'd had in years, and she flew home early, and I built the house anyway. That's the maddest part. My own clever daughter laid it all out plain and true, and I nodded, and I did it anyway. Say it out loud, and it sounds like the ravings of a madman. I know that. My mate Bluey at the club, when I finally told him, he just stared at me and said, "Macca, mate, what were you thinking?" And the honest answer is, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. I was 70 years old, and I finally had a reason to be alive. A family, and a house, and a boy who called me Papa. And no sum on a bank statement was going to talk me out of it. Every stage of that build, Rosa would video call me from the site, walking me round the rising walls. "This is our room, Macca. This is Kenji's room. This is where we will have our coffee." And I'd sit in Gladstone watching my own future get built out of my own savings. And I was happy. Dead set happy. I don't know how to make you understand that except to say it plainly. I knew what I was spending, and I was happy to spend it. We set the wedding for the following year. And to get married, and to sort a proper visa so Rosa and Kenji could come to Australia, or so I could get the marriage visa to stay there, we had to start the paperwork. And that's where the whole thing, this house of cards, I'd spent 3 years, and near everything I had building, that's where it came down. Not because I went looking. I wasn't looking for anything. I was filling in forms. Just a bloke filling in forms so he could marry his girl. That's all I was doing when the floor gave way. The paperwork's how it came out, in the end, and there's a cruel sort of justice in that, because paperwork was the one honest thing in the whole business. Numbers and forms don't love you, and they don't lie to you. To get married out there, and then to lodge for Rosa and the boy to come to Australia, we needed her papers in order. And one of the things they want, it's called a CNOMAR, Certificate of No Marriage Record. Comes from the PSA, their records office. Basically a government slip that says This person is free to marry. No existing marriage on the books. Every foreigner who's been down that road knows the word. I didn't then. Rosa was handling the local end, and now that I look back, she'd been slow about it. Delays, this office, that requirement, come back next week. I put it down to how things move out there, which is to say, sideways and slow. Filipino time, everyone jokes about it. I didn't think a thing of it. But I'd got impatient, and I was paying an agency in Dumaguete to help push our visa side along. And the woman there, brisk sort, she ordered the Senomar herself to save time. And it came back with a marriage on it. Rosalinda, married, 15 years back, to a man named Arnel, Kenji's father, the bloke who'd gone to Manila and never come home. They'd never divorced. And here's the thing that took me a full day to get my head round. Sitting in that agency office with the fan going and the woman looking at me with real pity on her face. They couldn't have divorced. There's no divorce in the Philippines. None. It's the only country left, near enough apart from the Vatican, where you cannot legally divorce. If a marriage goes bad, if the fella walks out and vanishes for 15 years, you're still married to him. The only way out is an annulment, which is a court case, years of it, and hundreds of thousands of pesos. 500,000, the woman said, maybe more. $14,000, our money, and 2 to 5 years of courts. And until that was done, Rosa was Arnel's wife. Not mine. Never could be mine. And if I'd married her without it, that'd have been bigamy, a crime, on her side and tangled on mine. I want to tell you I stormed off and rang her. All fire. I didn't. I sat in that office, and I felt very old, and very stupid, and very far from home. Then I got a tricycle back to my little room near the boulevard, and I sat on the bed for about 3 hours, and didn't ring anyone. The sun went down over the water outside. All that pink and gold I'd fallen in love with, the whole town out walking and eating Sylvanas, and I sat in the dark. When I finally rang her, I didn't shout. That's not me. I just said, Rosa, there's a marriage on your Senomar. And the line went quiet, long quiet, and then she started to cry. And it wasn't put on. I've known enough false and enough true in my life to tell the two apart. And this was true. She said, I was going to tell you. And I said, when? And she didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep that night, the night the paper came back. I lay in that little room with the aircon rattling and the karaoke from some bar down the boulevard murdering a Whitney Houston song till near 2, and I ran the whole 3 years back through my head like a bloke checking a weld for the crack he missed. And they were all there once I looked. The slowness about the Senomar. The way she'd steer off marriage talk onto the house whenever I got specific about dates. The one time I'd asked, early, was she properly divorced, and she'd said, it is complicated in my country, and changed the subject to Kenji. And I'd let her because I didn't want the answer to be complicated. I wanted it to be simple and mine. I'd had the thread in my hand the whole time. I just never pulled it, because I was frightened of what the jumper would look like once it came undone. And now, here it was, undone, all over the floor. So it came out, that night and over the next few days, in pieces. She'd married Arnel at 19. He knocked her about. Then he left for Manila when Kenji was a baby, and she never heard from him again. Didn't know if he was alive or dead. In her mind, in her heart, she wasn't married. He was gone. To her that was over. But the paper said otherwise, and she'd known the whole time that the paper said otherwise, and she'd let me plan a wedding, and build a house, and pour my life savings into a future that legally could never be. Because, and this is the part that one still turn over at 4 in the morning, because she was ashamed, and because she was frightened I'd leave if I knew, and because out there you don't say the awkward thing, you let it sit, and you hope it sorts itself. And maybe, God forgive me for still wondering, maybe because the money was good and steady, and a legal problem might have turned it off. Both of those can be true at once. That's what nobody warns you about. She loved me, and she used me. The family needed help, and the family let me become the answer to every problem they ever had. It wasn't a con. Nobody sat in a room and planned to skin the old Kano. And also, I was skinned. Both. At the same time. I've had 2 years to make it simpler in my head, and I can't, because it isn't. I stayed on another week after it came out, which some'd say was daft, but I couldn't just get on a plane and leave it a wound. We sat on the seawall one evening, the two of us, not touching, watching the same sunset I'd fallen for, and neither of us said much. She wasn't playing me for sympathy. She'd gone past that, into something flatter and more honest. At one point, she said, quiet, looking at the water, "In my country, a woman like me has no way out. He is gone, but I am his forever on the paper. I cannot marry. I cannot fix it. It costs too much. So when a good man comes, what do? I tell him the truth, and he leaves, and my family starves. Or I say nothing and hope." She wasn't asking me to forgive it. She was just telling me how the trap was built, from the inside, by people who didn't build it. And God help me, I understood. That's the worst of it. I understood her completely, and it changed nothing about what it cost me. I asked her, that hard week, one question. I said, "Did you know, when I started building the house, that we could never marry?" And she was honest, at the last, when it was all already lost. She said, "Yes." And then she said, "But I thought, if the house is built, maybe you will stay anyway. Maybe the papers will not matter." And there it was. She hadn't lied about loving me, I don't think. She'd just quietly bet my whole life savings that love would make the law not matter. And it doesn't. The law doesn't care how you feel. Neither does a cinema. I didn't marry her, of course. Couldn't. I flew home to Gladstone with my future cancelled, and a house I'd paid for sitting on land I'll never own, in a country where I've got no claim to any of it. Let me total it up for you, because I know that's what you're all sitting there wondering, and you've earned it for listening this far. All up, over the 3 years, the monthly money, the schooling, the hospital, the store, the roof, the flights, and that great, daft house, it came to somewhere north of $45,000. Closer to 50, if I'm honest with myself, which took me a while to be. A lifetime in the steelworks, doing without, saving hard, and the best part of it gone into the hills behind Dumaguete. I've got maybe 17,000 left, and the pension. I'll be right. I'm not eating cat food. But I'll not be leaving Kylie much, and that's a thing that sits on a man. We still talk, Rosa and me. That surprises people, and it surprises me some days too. Not often, and not like before, but she'll message on Kenji's birthday, a photo of him getting taller, and I'll send a bit for the boy's shoes, because he didn't do anything wrong in all this. He was 7, and I'll not punish a kid for the sins of the grown-ups round him. Bluey at the club reckons I'm a mug still, that she's just keeping the line warm in case the money starts again. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am. But I've decided I'd rather be a mug who kept a bit of kindness for a boy than a hard man who cut it all off clean to feel like he'd won. There's no winning in this anyway. There's just what you can live with when the lights are off. The house is finished, by the way. They live in it. Corazon and Ben and Jomar and the little sister, and Kenji. The house I built stands there with a good roof that doesn't sing in the rain. And my son, that isn't my son, grows up in a room I paid for, and I'll never see it again. I could rage about that. Some nights I do, but most nights, and I know how this sounds, most nights I'm glad the boy's dry. Here's where I've landed, and then I'll shut up. People want me to hate her. My mates want it. Makes the story simpler. Makes them feel safer. Like it couldn't happen to them because they'd never fall for a wicked woman. But she wasn't wicked. She was a poor woman with a hungry family and a legal cage she couldn't get out of, and a rich old foreigner who wanted to be needed so badly he never once asked the right question. We were both of us using the other for something we didn't have. She wanted a way out and up. I wanted a family and a purpose and a boy to call me Papa. For a while, we both got it. It just wasn't built on ground either of us could stand on. Their land, their marriage, their rules. I was a guest in all of it, paying rent on a life that was never going to be mine. What I'd say to the blokes my age watching this, and I know some of you are, sitting up late in a too-quiet house with a warm beer and a cold feeling, is this. It's not the woman you've got to watch. It's the hole in yourself. That's what gets filled with other people's needs, till there's nothing left of your own good sense. Ask the awkward question early. Ask about the marriage. Ask for the cinema before you ask her father to the wedding. Not after you've built him a house. It's not cruel to ask. It's the kindest thing, for everyone. And if you can't bring yourself to ask because you're scared of the answer, then the answer's already got you, and you'd best sort out why the hole in you is that deep before you go filling it with anyone at all. That's what I didn't do. That's the whole of it. I don't regret Kenji. I'll say that till they put me in the ground. Everything else, yeah, mostly. But not the boy. Some things you can't buy and can't lose, and a kid drawing a stickman granddad with a helicopter is one of them. That's Maka, 71, back in his quiet Queenslander with the mango tree and the boat he never uses. A good deal lighter in the bank and, in his own words, not entirely sorry he did it, which is about the most honest thing a man in his position can say. We tell these stories on Inside the Philippines journals not to warn you off the Philippines, and not to tell you every woman out there is after your pension, because that's a lie, and a lazy one. We tell them because the truth is almost always messier than the warning. There are real families out there, and real love and real need, all tangled up together. And a man who goes in with his eyes open and the right questions asked has a far better chance than a man who goes in with a hole in his heart and his checkbook out. Maka went in lonely, and lonely men don't ask questions they're afraid to hear answered. That's the lesson, if there is one. If this reached you tonight, wherever you're watching from, do us that favor and say so in the comments. And share your own story if you've got one, because someone further back down the road needs to hear it. Look after yourselves and mind that hole in you before you go filling it with somebody else's family. We'll see you on the next one.